Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really vital question. What is our environmental impact?
It's a huge topic.
It is, and we've got a fascinating mix of sources to help us sort of get to grips with this. First up, 40 ways to be more eco-friendly in 2025 from Green Match. That gives us the practical, everyday actions.
Yeah, what can I actually do?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then we're diving into the philosophical side with the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on environmental ethics. Some big questions there about our relationship with nature.
Really fundamental questions, yeah.
And finally, we've got a deep scientific dive. It's from PMC, looking at the concept, consequences, and measurement of environmental impact.
So the science behind it all.
Right. Our mission, really, is to pull all this together to give you a clearer picture of how we're affecting the planet and maybe what being truly eco-friendly looks like right now in 2025.
Okay.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, what strikes me immediately is how these different perspectives, the practical, the philosophical, and the scientific pate, they all seem to point towards the same underlying challenge.
Yeah.
It's like we're looking at a complex problem from multiple angles, each one revealing a crucial part of the puzzle.
Totally agree. Let's start with the practical then. What does it even mean to be eco-friendly? Green Match, well, it boils it down to living in a way that doesn't harm the environment, protecting the planet from man-made damage.
Seems straightforward enough.
Seems like it, but then they immediately hit you with the stark reality from the IPCC, the impacts of climate change. They're already hitting the most vulnerable areas hardest.
Yeah, displacing huge numbers of people, disrupting supply chains.
Everything from food to goods. This isn't just like a nice idea.
Yeah.
It's presented as a fundamental necessity.
And if we bring in the scientific view from that PMC article, this man-made damage is on a scale we're maybe only just beginning to fully grasp.
How so?
They talk about the Anthropocene, basically suggesting that human activity is now a dominant force shaping the Earth, like on par with geological processes.
Wow. Okay, that really reframes what not harmful means. Our capacity for impact is just immense.
It is.
And Green Match stresses that tackling this needs action on all fronts. From what we do in our homes to broader shifts in our communities, they point out that the way high-income cities currently consume resources simply isn't sustainable.
Right. The consumption patterns.
Yeah. They give us 7 actionable steps for 2025. Things like LED bulbs, using public transport, washing clothes less,
Less meat, too, right?
less meat, limiting air travel, looking into greener pension options, and choosing electronic over paper documents. They feel like tangible starting points.
And these seemingly small individual actions, they directly address what the PMC article identifies as root drivers, our consumption habits.
Right.
Every time we choose a more sustainable option, we're essentially lessening our demand on the planet's resources.
Okay, let's dig into those home improvements Green Match suggests. Renewable energy, like solar panels, that's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
They mentioned the average UK household could save a ton of carbon each year with solar PV. Plus, it helps clean up local air, gives you more control over energy, especially if you add battery storage.
And there are grants sometimes, aren't there?
Yeah, they mentioned UK grants are available, which helps with the upfront cost. Makes it feel much more achievable.
Well, what's interesting from an ethical angle is how something like solar power benefits us directly, energy savings, cleaner air, and the environment more broadly, reduces reliance on fossil fuels.
It's a win-win, almost.
It's a great example of where self-interest and the planet's well-being can actually align.
They also talk about smart thermostats, the ones that learn when you need heat.
Yeah, present sensing and all that.
Right. And they can sense when you're not home, adjust automatically. Apparently, Google Nest data showed pretty significant energy reductions in UK homes using them, like 16.5%.
That's quite a bit.
And then there's LED lighting, lasts ages, uses a tiny fraction of the energy of old bulbs, like 80–90% efficient versus maybe 20%.
Huge difference.
The Energy Saving Trust reckons you could save up to 40 kilos of carbon a year just by switching. It feels like free money, almost, and it's better for the planet.
And these efficiency measures are key because they cut the amount of energy we need in the first place.
Right.
Which cuts demand on power sources, many of which, still rely on burning fossil fuels. It's about doing more with less, fundamentally.
Okay, so moving beyond just energy, Green Match highlights eco-friendly cleaning products, avoiding those harsh chemicals that end up polluting rivers, harming wildlife.
Which links straight back to that PMC article's points on chemical contamination and water degradation.
Definitely. They even suggest DIY options, vinegar, lemon juice, bicarbonate of soda.
Back to basics.
Kind of. And then biodegradable household items, things that reduce waste going to landfill. Recycled toilet paper, natural shampoo, bamboo toothbrushes.
So acknowledging that the stuff we use every day does have an impact downstream.
Exactly. And who knew insulation and draft-proofing were so critical? GreenMatch says up to 40% of heat can just escape through gaps.
40%, that's massive.
It is. They cover everything. Double, triple glazed windows with argon gas.
Low E class, yeah.
Insulating walls, lofts, apparently up to 25% of heat loss is through the roof. Filling floorboard gaps, even simple stuff like foil behind radiators and draft excluders for doors and windows.
These seem like relatively straightforward ways to keep warmer without just turning up the heat.
Definitely.
And again, it resonates with resource conservation. Preventing heat loss isn't just saving money, it's reducing the demand for energy generation. Direct environmental benefit.
Switching how we heat is another big one they mention. Upgrading to a modern condensing boiler is much more efficient.
Yeah, they mentioned gas combi boilers, hydrogen ones.
Right, hydrogen boilers, potentially emissions-free with just water as a byproduct. And biomass boilers using organic stuff.
But heat pumps seem to be getting a lot of buzz.
Yeah, as a really sustainable option. Pulling heat from the air, ground, or water. Super efficient, apparently 200–600%.
Incredible efficiency. And there's that UK grant scheme too.
Yeah, the boiler upgrade scheme, 5,000 pounds off air source heat pumps. And finally, solar thermal systems using the sun's heat directly for water or space heating.
So the shift towards things like heat pumps and solar thermal directly tackles that alteration of biogeochemical cycles, especially the carbon cycle that the PMC article was banging the drum about.
Right.
Moving away from burning fossil fuels for heat just cuts those greenhouse gas emissions significantly.
Okay, let's change tack slightly. How we get around. Electric cars. GreenMatch highlights them as way more sustainable than petrol or diesel.
Which we know are huge contributors to climate change and air pollution. Transport was, 27% of UK emissions in 2019? Mostly road transport.
Yeah, 91% from roads. So EVs cut out those tailpipe emissions. Hybrids are maybe a step, but full electric is the goal there.
And that transition is crucial, not just for climate, but for cleaner air in towns and cities too.
What about what we wear? This was interesting. GreenMatch says washing clothes less is a big deal.
Less. Why less?
Because synthetic fabrics shed microplastics into the ocean when washed. Apparently, it's like 16% of ocean microplastics.
Wow, and those get into the food chain.
Exactly. Harms ecosystems, sea life, potentially us. Plus, overwashing damages clothes, wastes water, and energy. They also say, don't just throw wearable clothes away.
Because of landfill.
Yeah, the UK produces 1 million tons of textile waste a year. Landfills release greenhouse gases. And ultra-fast fashion just drives over consumerism.
So repair, alter, buy secondhand.
Buy better quality stuff that lasts. Research sustainable brands.
That microplastics issue really highlights how everyday actions have these unexpected, far-reaching consequences, doesn't it?
It really does.
Those tiny particles getting into ecosystems. It illustrates that interconnectedness the PMC article talked about with contamination.
And then there's food. GreenMatch emphasizes eating less meat as a significant way to cut greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture methane, nitrous oxide.
Yeah, meat and dairy are responsible for most of it. Reducing intake has a big impact.
And buying local produce. Cuts down transport emissions. Average fresh food travels 1,500 miles.
That's huge. Plus refrigeration. Local food supports local supply chains, often more nutritious too.
And food waste. Just limiting it is crucial. UK produced 9.5 million tons in 2018. That's equivalent to 25 million tons of greenhouse gases, mostly from households.
So portioning, buying only what's needed, maybe composting waste?
Yeah, using it as fertilizer.
Our diets just have these profound environmental implications. Land use, emissions, both GreenMatch and PMC make that really clear. Less meat, less waste, powerful levers.
Travel's another area. GreenMatch urges us to reconsider flying. Aviation emissions could take up 1/6 of the remaining carbon budget for 1.5 degrees C warming.
And decarbonizing planes is slow going.
Right. Trains are suggested as much greener, and apparently cruise holidays. Surprisingly large footprint, too.
So being mindful of holiday impact, sustainable tourism.
Yeah, limit your footprint, spend wisely, help sustain the environment, prevent over-tourism.
It highlights the impact of our leisure choices. Flying, especially, has that disproportionately high carbon footprint. Being conscious there is essential.
Even choices at work and school add up. GreenMatch mentions looking into greener pension funds.
Because UK pensions are big investors in fossil fuels.
Exactly. Switching puts pressure on them. Also, being mindful about printing, encouraging greener commutes, smarter electricity use, boosting recycling, reusable containers.
It's about weaving that awareness into all parts of daily life.
Right.
And what's important there is seeing environmental responsibility isn't just personal. It extends to workplaces, schools. Collective action in those places can really add up.
Definitely. Okay, now let's shift gears a bit. Let's look at the philosophical side from that Stanford Encyclopedia entry on environmental ethics.
Okay.
This really makes you think about why we should care. It challenges anthropocentrism, the idea that humans are the only things that matter morally. It asks, does nature have value in itself, regardless of its use to us?
This is where it gets really thought-provoking, yeah. The entry explores different views, like enlightened anthropocentrism,
Which is?
basically arguing we should protect the environment because it ultimately benefits humans, now and in the future. So even from a human-centered view, environmental protection is rational, necessary.
Right. It also brings up influential ideas like Christopher Stone's argument, should trees have standing?
Ah, yes, the legal standing idea.
Suggesting natural objects, like trees, should be able to effectively sue for damages through legal representation. And it's amazing that idea has actually influenced legal systems globally, things getting legal personhood.
Stone's proposal really pushes against traditional legal frameworks, seeing the environment not just as property to exploit, but as something with inherent worth deserving protection.
The entry also touches on land ethics, seeing the entire ecological community as having intrinsic value, sometimes even suggesting the good of the whole outweighs individual parts.
Which is pretty radical.
Very. And controversial sparked debates about, sacrificing individuals for the greater good.
That holistic view emphasizes interconnectedness, but yeah, raises complex questions about individual value within that framework, highlights the tensions in defining our ethical duties.
And then there's sustainability. Crucial concept. The entry traces it back. Malthus, Mill, concerns about population, resources.
Culminating in the Brundtland Report.
Right, with that famous definition. Meeting present needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own. It also looks at weak versus strong sustainability.
Difference being.
Whether natural resources or natural capital can just be substituted by human-made capital.
Yeah.
Strong sustainability says no, some natural capital is critical and irreplaceable. Brundtland leaned toward strong.
That sustainability discussion forces that long-term perspective, doesn't it? Thinking beyond immediate needs, thinking about the legacy for future generations.
Absolutely. Finally, the ethics entry tackles environmental justice, how negative impacts often fall disproportionately on vulnerable people, future generations, and the complexities of tackling climate change, Gardner's perfect moral storm, responsibilities dispersed, long time frames involved.
Lack of effective global institutions, too.
Exactly. And it touches on misinformation hindering action, the need to understand how natural systems are actually responding to what we do.
That environmental justice point is vital. Environmental issues are deeply tied to social equity. Often, those who contributed least suffer the most.
Which leads us nicely, actually, to the scientific perspective from PMC. They define the environment as, well, everything physical, chemical, biological factors affecting living things.
And they hammer home that Anthropocene idea again, humans as a dominant force.
But they warn against just focusing on pollution and resources. Look at the bigger picture. Biotic impoverishment.
Biotic impoverishment, meaning...
the overall decline in Earth's capacity to support life. A systematic reduction.
Okay, so not just isolated incidents, but the cumulative effect of everything we do on the whole biosphere.
Exactly. PMC details how this happens. Indirectly, water degradation, soil depletion, chemical contamination, altering cycles like carbon and water, climate change.
And directly.
Directly, too.
Yeah.
Over-harvesting, think depleted fish stocks. Habitat destruction and fragmentation. They use this vivid analogy of tearing apart a Persian carpet.
That really visualizes it, the fragmentation.
Yeah. And spreading invasive species, biological pollution like zebra mussels, loss of genetic diversity in crops. Even genetic engineering raises concerns alongside potential benefits.
So multiple overlapping pressures on ecosystem.
And tragically, PMC also outlines how environmental degradation directly harms human life.
How so?
From spreading diseases, often originating in wildlife, to pollution impacts on health, like asthma, occupational hazards. Even highlighting modern lifestyle issues, the diseases of affluence, stress, linked to overconsumption.
So our health is directly linked to environmental health.
Completely. They also point out the loss of cultural diversity when environments degrade, indigenous knowledge disappearing, and the deep injustices the poorest bearing the brunt, environmental scarcity potentially leading to political instability, conflict.
It's a stark reminder. Our well-being is utterly tied to the planet's health, not just ecologically, but socially, economically, politically, too.
The article looks at root causes, our consumption, population growth, and points out that sometimes our tech or political fixes can accidentally make things worse.
The law of unintended consequences.
Basically, it also discusses trying to put an economic value on nature's services, pollination, soil formation, while acknowledging the core issue remains too many consuming too much.
And while valuing nature economically can be useful for arguing for conservation, it does raise those ethical questions about commodifying something potentially priceless. The fundamental challenge is still tackling unsustainable consumption.
Finally, PMC looks at measuring environmental health. Different indicators, chemical levels, emission rates, the species counts, but emphasizing biological indicators.
Like the Index of Biological Integrity.
Exactly. Directly assessing the health of living systems, not just physical measures. They also discuss ecological footprints, measuring our demand versus the planet's capacity. Many nations are running ecological deficits.
That gives a powerful visual of the scale of our resource use.
And they conclude by stressing the need to recognize and manage these impacts, mentioning risk assessment and the role of international agreements like the Montreal Protocol for Ozone or the Paris Accord for Climate.
And the Montreal Protocol example gives some hope, right? That collective action can work when the science is clear and the will is there.
It does offer some hope, yeah. So as we bring this deep dive to a close, the overwhelming takeaway for me is just the deep interconnectedness of it all.
Absolutely.
Our actions ripple outwards. Consequences across ecological, ethical, social, economic dimensions. And the urgency to act individually, collectively, it feels more critical than ever for our own well-being and the planet's.
Yeah, what's become really clear is that being eco-friendly in 2025 isn't just, ticking off a few easy tips. It seems to require a more fundamental shift.
A shift in what?
In understanding our place in the world, our responsibility to the environment, and, crucially, to future generations.
That's a good way to put it. So, considering this complex web of impacts we've explored, here's something to really think about for everyone listening.
Okay.
What's maybe one significant personal change you could make that you feel could have the biggest positive ripple effect towards a more sustainable future? And maybe, what are the core ethical principles that should truly guide our relationship with the natural world as we move forward?
Big questions to ponder.
Definitely. It's about our individual and collective responsibility, isn't it? In shaping a more environmentally just and sustainable 2025 and well beyond. Thanks for exploring this with us today.